Hi, the project today is to make this relatively new shelf into an antique using paint effects. I made this a couple of days ago with wood bought from Wickes. It's just basic pine, and routed out these decorative edges and finished it off with some beading, again from Wickes. But what I want to do is to give this some antique quality, so I'm going to use paint effects to make it look like an old piece of furniture. The first thing you need to do is to prime this bare pine to give you a good base to start your effects. I'm using Wickes water-based primer undercoat, which dries fairly quickly, so you can get your project started in double quick time. So as you can see, I've primed the bare wood. The next stage is to put on a base coat, which will be the coat that shows through once I've distressed the top coat. But you'll see that happening later on. Okay, so I've now applied my base coat, which is a dark green, and this I chose because it will show up all the eventual scuff marks and crackling that I'm going to apply to the finished piece. I'm going to coat this in a lighter calico, which I bought from Wickes, and it should be a nice contrast. Okay, so before I actually painted the piece, I practiced a little bit on some old timber, and this is my base coat colour. I've chosen a dark green because that will show through the top coat really well once it's distressed. What I want to do is to use a Craquelure technique, and if I move this along, I'll show you exactly what I want to happen. I want this piece to look like it's been around for a while, so what I'm doing is using a Crackle medium, and in this case I've used just ordinary everyday PVA glue, and what you have to do is paint that glue onto the base coat and leave it for around about 8 minutes, and then apply your top coat. Now it's important that your top coat is applied in one go. You mustn't go over your brush strokes too many times, otherwise you cut through the glue below and you lose the effect. This is an example of the different types of effects you can get. This particular piece here, I applied a very thick layer of glue and then waited for about 8 minutes and painted over it. With this one, you see there's a lot more lateral cracking, and that's because rather than painting the glue on, I put it on with a cloth, and I've tried stippling it with a brush as well, and you get smaller cracks if you stipple. But I'll show you this when I do the actual piece. As you can see, you can never be sure what kind of effect you're going to get, but that's the wonderful thing about it. It's completely and utterly unpredictable. Okay, the next stage is to apply the PVA crackle effect. Now I'm going to use two techniques. I'm going to use a brush and I'm going to use a cloth. And the reason for this is if you use a brush, you get longer, more linear cracks, whereas if you stipple with a cloth, you get finer, more dense, tiny cracks appearing. So I'm going to use both techniques to get a contrast of different types of crackle effect. I'm going to do this in sections because you have to get the top coat on within probably 8 to 10 minutes of putting the PVA on. You don't want the PVA to dry out too much, otherwise you lose the effect and just end up with a flat coat of calico without any cracks in it, or very few cracks. Now the principle behind this is very simple. The rate of drying for the PVA is different from the top coat, and this causes the top coat to fracture. So it's just the difference in the time the glue and the paint takes to dry that causes that fracturing of the top coat. So I'm applying the PVA. Now, trying to avoid brushing over the same areas too heavily. Going to stipple a little bit with this. And of course, if you find there are too many cracks or you've gone overboard a little bit too much, you can always paint over it again. So here we are some 8 to 10 minutes later, and you can see that the PVA is still pretty white. It hasn't gone clear yet. I'm not too worried about that. The more moisture you have in the PVA, the more cracks you will get. So let's put our top coat on, and then we can literally watch paint dry. Again, avoid going over areas twice if you can avoid it. We'll come back in about half an hour and see what's happened. As you can see from the images, the cracking is quite dramatic after about half an hour. You can speed it up by just putting a hairdryer on it, and the final thing to do with this now will be to give this a coat of varnish. But I want to distress the edges a little bit to make it look as though it's been a little bit worn. So I'm just going to scuff the edges. Make it look as though it's been knocked about. Well, I'm going to finish this piece and then we'll look at it in finality. And as I say, because we've actually damaged the paint, we need to put a protective layer on top of it. One thing I have to point out when I applied the top coat is I used a nylon brush. A nylon brush gives you more striations, more lines, and these help with the cracking. So I'm going to finish this now and then we'll have a look at the final piece.
So here it is in all its glory. I've varnished it with an acrylic based eggshell finished varnish and pinned it to the wall and filled it with a few of my favourite kitchen things. I am very pleased with the effect. It fits in with the antique French kitchen feel that I really wanted. We can have a look at the Craquelure effect in detail here, and as you can see, you can never quite predict what is going to happen, but that's the beauty of the effect. It's totally unpredictable, and I'm still very pleased with the outcome. I hope your future projects are as successful as mine seems to have been. Thank you very much for watching. This is JSR signing off.